Ancient regime reviewed in 12 minutes. Key learning is understanding the historical term Ancien regime. What did that simply mean? It means what was French society and life like before the revolution takes place. The revolution takes place with the fall of the prison Bastille in July 14th, 1789. But we need to understand what life was like before that to understand why millions of people would uprise to bring down King Louis XVI and his Queen Marie Antoinette. So ancient regime, simply defined, is what was life and society, the economics, the government, the social status, the social hierarchy. What was all that like before the revolution of 1789? Undertaken is what is meant by the political theory absolute monarchy and its co-founder, or its coessence, the religious theory divine right. So to understand those two key terms is to understand how King Louis XVI was expected to rule. In reality, whole different scheme of things. So the expectation was that King Louis XVI ruled as an absolute ruler who had divine right to justify his legitimacy to rule. So he was supposed to be an absolute ruler, supposed to be a commanding personality in control, total control over their government, control over their citizens, taxation, daily life. He was also supposed to be unaccountable. It was supposed to be an absolute ruler is you are the voice and it ends with your voice. To support this notion that he was absolute, he also needed something that was given to him on behalf of the Catholic Church, and that was divine right. Divine right means that King Louis comes from a bloodline of royals that have been chosen and anointed by God to lead and rule. Because they've been chosen by God, it simply means that they're infallible, they're perfect, they don't make mistakes. So when things actually aren't going well in French society, it can't be at the hands of King Louis because he's been anointed by God. So the mistakes must be coming from elsewhere. So therefore, absolute monarchs are always able to deflect, I guess, any weaknesses or trouble and blame it on other things because they've been commissioned by God to rule, which means they are perfect. And to criticize them is to criticize God, which in these times, in ancient regime, that would be considered blasphemous, which means you could be imprisoned, even killed for that. So this leads to a society where nobody criticizes the absolute rule of the monarchy, and therefore they rule without account. In reality, King Louis is not really a prime example of an absolute ruler. He's come to this role as a 19-year-old who has been not so much his life prepared for it because it was supposed to go to his brothers and his dad, but due to unforeseen circumstances like their deaths, he is the ruler. Coming in at 19 means he's easily manipulated. You've got to remember that his government, his cabinet of ministers are nobles, wealthy, looking out for their own interests. So they manipulate him to get what's going to benefit them. Because it takes 7 years for the marriage to be consummated, I guess the innuendo and the rumours just go forth. And you remember you're in a time before social media and that, so how do rumours spread? They spread through rumour of mouth. And because King and Queen are living in Versailles, because they're far away, removed from Paris and the general other cities of France, it means that nobody ever puts a stop to these rumours because Marie and King Louis can't just tweet and they can't just appear on TV and say this isn't true. So the rumours build up until an heir is born, and we do know that Louis just took a while to learn what to do. The thing about Louis, the positive, is that he really wanted to be loved. He wanted to do right by his citizens, and he wanted to be very different to the Sun King, his great-grandfather, who ruled really absolutely and quite cruelly. And so when he first begins, he's open to suggestions, he's open to ideas, he's almost open to consulting, which absolute rulers aren't supposed to do. But because he is open to things, it means people are going to manipulate him. He's scared by confrontation. So those institutions like the Catholic Church and the First and Second Estate, the clergy and the wealthy nobility, they put pressure on him, and he sort of backs down, and he sort of lets them run the show and gives them into them, I guess, because he doesn't like that confrontation. And he somewhat suffers from anxiety and depression. He's shy, he's indecisive, he's not very imaginative. He surrounds himself with people that are going to be yes men. So his cabinet of ministers are generally people who are going to agree with him, because to feel like he is somewhat absolute, that's the only thing that he really can control. So he gets rid of ministers that don't follow his line, which means he's never getting a real picture of what is happening in society. And then the other really big sticking point and limit for him is the parlements. Now, the parlements we call today parliaments. There were 13 of them. They were situated all around France, but the largest one was in Paris, which you know is only a couple of hours away from Versailles. So Louis hears regularly what's going on there. They are just massive courts, high courts of where you can go to appeal. And their job is to read Louis's edicts, his laws, and if they don't think they serve the common interests of the people, they can remonstrance, which is they can file him a letter, an order, to say that they are objecting to this particular law he's putting out. Now, if he was absolute, he would use what you call lit de justice, and that last little mixture. So if he was absolute, he would use a lit de justice, and that is where he actually physically turns up to the parlement that is refusing to register his law, and he in person demands that they register it. His presence, his godlike presence being there, his heavy personality, usually would force the parliaments to register the law, because they'd be quite overwhelmed that the king has turned up to their parliament to tell them off. And usually that worked. But with King Louis, you're going to find out that that didn't work. And then the last resort that he would have on this limit to his power was he could use a lettre de cachet, which is he could send his troops into the parlement that is refusing to register his laws. And he could seek for those magistrates in that parlement to be arrested, imprisoned, and sometimes some of them would lose their lives. So that's what he could do as an absolute ruler in France. But because of his personality, those lit de justice and lettre de cachet probably won't scare the parlements, because he just doesn't have the personality to deliver it. The other thing that you looked at was the features of King Louis, how he's portrayed in pictures, knowing that his crown, the sans culottes, or the culottes around his knees, the crown, the sceptre, the orb, all these icons are what were supposed to put out to the public with how he was absolute. But in reality, not so much the case, as you know. And the other figure that we explored was Marie Antoinette. And in a nutshell, if I can wrap her up in 30 seconds, remember she comes over when she's a 14-year-old girl. She gets married at 15. Instantly, she has to give away her life that was in Austria. Now, she has been prepared for the role as queen. Unlike Louis, she has been trained from birth, basically. So she wants to do right by her family, and she has married King Louis so that France and Austria, who were enemies, are now an alliance. But because she's come from the arch enemy, the people already see her as an invader, a foreigner. They already refer to her as, this foreign whore. So it would take a lot for her to get on their good side. And it's not helped by the fact that she is 7 years without child. So the rumours start that is it because she's having all these affairs and she's not giving her time to the king. Then, of course, we have the libels, which are those disgusting pamphlets that are produced about her. As I said before, they don't go to the media. They don't spruik about this isn't true. So these rumours almost become fact. The other thing is, because she goes 7 years without a child, she becomes quite isolated and bored, and that probably explains her parties and the fashion stakes and the hair and the makeup and the spending, because she feels like there's no purpose in life until she has her first child. Now, the other thing that we've looked at that you've done a mix and match task about was the social system. So the king and the queen are your top, And then it was broken into 3 estates, and each of those 3 estates had certain type of people in them. They had certain roles and responsibilities to king and society. Some of them enjoyed privileges, others did not, and then they had grievances. They all had some form of complaint that they would eventually want King Louis to answer. Now, the big 2 ideas about how society was structured in France before the Revolution is it was based on privilege and deference, and that is certain groups were allowed special advantages and entitlements and benefits simply because of the estate they were born into. And because of this, they looked at the other estate, the 3rd estate, as being better than them. They were superior. And so this 3rd estate had to look up for the entirety of their life at these privileged estates, the 1st and 2nd, and notice that they were the social betters. And to show their social betters, they actually bowed in their presence. They paid extra taxes to them. They did all these signs of respect, and they submitted to these groups. So society was unfair because it was based on this old medieval notion that you should give, thanks to your social betters. And it was based on really unfair privileges which hadn't rolled with the time. So you know that there were 3 estates. There was 1st, 2nd, 3rd. First is the clergy. Now we have 2 extremes. We have those who are wealthy in bishops and archbishops, and then we have those parish priests and nuns who simply are there living with the peasants and struggling themselves to get by. You have the 2nd estate, which is made of 3 different types of nobles. Those who were in King Louis's government, so his cabinet ministers, and those in the parlement, so they're called nobles of the robe because they're serving the government. Then you had nobles of the sword, who were generals who went off and obviously fought for Louis and mobilised the army and defended France on behalf of Louis. And then you had nobles of the court, and that is the wealthiest. There was 6,000 of them. They lived around Versailles. They were the friends and the family of King Louis and Marie Antoinette, and they were the ones in his ear. And they are important because they're completely removed from what France society is like. They are so wealthy that they have no idea what's going on behind the scenes, and therefore King Louis is never getting a real true story about the vibe of his nation, I guess. And then it comes to the 3rd estate, which is made up of very extremes. You have the bourgeoisie, who are highly educated men, who are merchant traders, bankers, lawyers, doctors, who make big money for France. Basically, they are the hub of the investment and loans that France lives on. And yet they can't rise anywhere. They're classed as shit kickers because of where they were born. Then you have the urban workers who live in the cities, and that's from your blacksmiths, your trade, your builders, construction, all the way down to your domestic servants, prostitutes, homeless. And then, of course, you have the largest group in society, which is the peasantry. So the 3rd estate is so extreme. Bourgeoisie, highly illiterate, are going to use the ideas of the Enlightenment versus peasants who some could read, some could write, but most couldn't. Then you can take a quick moment to pause this video and read about their roles, their privileges, and their grievances. But in a nutshell, clearly the 3rd estate is where our large focus is going to be. Why? Because they're the group that get burdened with all of the taxes. 2 biggest taxes are the tithe, which is you are paying a certain amount of money for your church to be upkept and to provide charity, and yet your archbishops and bishops are spending that money. Not fair. And then the tully, which is a land tax imposed on non-nobles so that you can farm and lease other land. So even the bourgeoisie, to be able to own property, had to buy certain land off nobles, so the 2nd estate, and so they're constantly paying a tully as well. So other taxes were stupid, like feudal dues, which is you're paying money as a peasant just to farm and lease the land. Champagne, you're paying just to be able to graze and kill on these lands. So the burden of the taxation system fell entirely on the backs of one estate. Biggest grievance, clearly, is people want a fair taxation. There were 4 reasons why France was bankrupt. I said this video would go for 12 minutes. I'm struggling to get it. Let's see if I can wrap it all up in about 3 minutes. Okay, France was bankrupt for 4 reasons. Number 1 reason was the way that taxes were collected. It was chaotic. It was unfair. What it was supposed to be was an intendant who was a royal governor employed directly by the king. It was his job to be in charge of his province, all right, so his region, his Wimmera. He was supposed to collect the taxes on behalf of the king. But he was too busy with other jobs like running local councils and trying to make sure the roads and everything were kept well in his province that he palmed this job off to a person called a tax farmer. Now, you really wanted to be a tax farmer because to be a tax farmer was better than being a peasant and an urban worker. And if you weren't entirely literate like the bourgeoisie, it was a good job to buy yourself in. So men would actually buy venal offices. Now, what is a venal office? That's just buying yourself into the second estate. So they would make their wealth through whatever means it was. They would buy into this role, and then it was their job to go into the provinces and collect the taxes. Clearly, taxes are collected off the third estate because that's the state paying all the taxes. So what happened with this? When the tax farmer went to then give the money to the intendant, he pocketed some himself. When the intendant went to give it on then to the crown, to the king, he pocketed himself. So it's unfair because it's only collecting from one estate. It's chaotic because there's too many middlemen involved and the king's coffers never get full. The other reasons why we are in a financial crisis is Louis has been trying to win wars overseas. He has funded the American war because it's against Great Britain and that's his arch rival and he wants to bring them down. But in doing all this, you are giving huge loans and huge resources out of your nation for nothing in return. So by the time the American Revolution, War of Independence is over, it's cost France $1.3 billion and has left them in the red. Clearly, if you're majorly an agriculture society, having bad harvests will not help your bank accounts because your peasantry is paying the most taxes out of everybody in society. Therefore, if they're not being able to produce their harvests and have a great windfall of wheat and everything at the end of the year, then when your tax farmer comes around to collect the tax, there won't be any money to collect because they haven't been able to profit off a harvest because it's rained and it's droughted and all that. And then lucky last, the one that seems to be the one that gets stabbed with everything is royal wastefulness. Now, the royals only out of the entire budget spent 6%. However, because of the way Marie, I guess, behaved and the rumours that persisted about her, most French people believed that they were bankrupt purely because of Marie and Louis's actions, when in actual reality, it is mainly due to the money they're spending on wars, what happens when you don't have a good harvest year, and how the taxation system was unequal and chaotic. And to wrap up the ancient regime and to get this under 20 minutes, nobody ever knows what is really going on in their own country until others tell them so. And that's the importance of the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment is a group of very educated men who wrote books and published pamphlets and made the Third Estate aware that you have been taken for a fool for all these centuries. The privileged estates who are supposed to be offering you charity and comfort and education in the clergy and protection by the law and protection in times of war by the second estate, the nobility, they aren't. They're living off the fact that they don't have to pay a certain amount of taxes. They're making their money, they're pocketing it, they're living a great life. They're making you see them as superior and you submit to them and you respect them. What are you going to do about it, Third Estate? Nothing, because nobody has woken you up to all of this. But with the Enlightenment, they do. They challenge the Catholic Church and say, what is the purpose of the Church if it is not to support welfare and love and compassion? What is the purpose of your absolute ruler if he does not share and consult you in times of war and taxation? He can't impose new taxes on you unless he consults you. What about representation? You should not have to pay new taxes until all estates are represented and talked to by the king and voted on. So these ideas are revolutionary. Then you've got Rousseau's ideas, which is Men should all be equal. You're born free, so therefore you should be equal. You should break away from your chains, and you should hold your king accountable. He should have a social contract with you. This social contract is that he serves for you and you serve for him. When he breaks that, you should be able to remove him and his government. So that's coming from Rousseau. And then Montesquieu went even further, and he said, you shouldn't have an absolute king. You should have a king who shares power. And he shares power through 3 systems. He shares power by having law courts, just like the parliaments, and they register laws and discuss and debate. Then you can have local councils. And so he said that, it should be spread out, and the king should have all these avenues to consult, so therefore he can make the best decision for all of the people. And so we are at this point of the revolution where we're in a financial crisis, and what is King Louis going to do about it? He consults his Controller General Necker, who produces the Compte Rendu, which falsifies where France is positioned, and leads France to the first stop, which is the Assembly of Notables, where the king has to talk to the first and second estate, mostly 144 nobles. Basically, he doesn't show that he's absolute. He begs them to take on some more taxes, to take the burden off the third estate, and you can imagine how the nobles responded to that. That's where we are with Area Study 1, and everything we do from now on for the next 2 weeks will form the basis of your SAC. So I'm hoping you've taken the time to watch this quick overview, and if you, again, have any concerns about what you're learning and understanding in history, you need to make time with me. You need to see me in spares. I'll come to study slams. But how well you will do in this subject is not going to be entirely because of me. At the end of the year, I'll make up about 30%. I guided you through it, but 70% was on your back. Did you use class time well? Or did you stuff around? Did you do homework tasks or you just let them go? Did you ask Miss G extra questions? Did you partake in discussions in class? Did you really get into the activities? The more you get into this, the more that you're going to cement in your head, and the more you're going to take away and have a good time in that exam. So it's up to you guys. I can only push you and prod you so far. I can only try and inspire you so far. You've got to give something back to me. I hope you will. And even if these videos only result in one of you really taking the passion on this subject on, well, then I've done good by one of you. Okay, ciao.